Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have affordable ACT and CLT courses that include everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of review questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial at achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast will get you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Becky Priest, who is the Director of Counseling at the Cambridge School. And Becky, I'd love if you could introduce
Hi,
yourself.
Tyler. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I've enjoyed listening to all of your previous episodes, and I'm delighted to be here. I am, as you said, the Director of College Counseling at the Cambridge School in San Diego. We are a small classical Christian school, but we are celebrating our 20th year this year. We have had 9 graduating classes so far, and I've been really blessed to be the person who has founded the program and built the college counseling program at our school. And one of the things that I love talking about with that is just the network of colleagues that have existed to help people like me get started in our jobs and to learn all the ins and outs of college counseling. So I give a lot of shout outs to colleagues across the nation and especially here in San Diego that are just great college counselors. I love this profession. We're very collegial. We love sharing our information. And so that's why part of why I'm really glad to be on the podcast. But my professional background started at Washington University in St. Louis a long time ago, where I did work in the financial aid office, both as a work study student and then later as a full time employee. And so I got to learn financial aid at a very well resourced institution with ethical policies and the ability to award really robust need based financial aid. And I've read tens of thousands of FAFSAs and CSS profiles over the years. And even though that was a long time ago, I have stayed very active in the financial aid profession. I've attended national conferences, maintained a membership in the professional organization. And then in my second half of adult life, getting to become a college counselor at a high school, I've found that bringing that financial aid knowledge with me to my college counseling has been a real boon to our school, but also just the collegial network that exists of college counselors being able to share that financial aid knowledge with other schools. And I speak often about the topic. And like I said, it's a real asset that I bring that helps the families at my school, especially, to be able to navigate the complexities of college financial aid.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm really glad to have you on the show. And I'm really excited to talk to you about one of the most important aspects of college nowadays, which is controlling the costs, right? I think the way that I'd start this out is just by saying that, I think that a lot of people come into this process very blind, and really you need to come into it with a strategic approach. And because college is becoming ridiculously expensive, obviously, especially for the private schools. But like on the flip side, almost nobody is paying full price anymore, right? So I'd love for you to kind of talk about like the landscape of financial aid and peel back the
Sure, I'd
curtain
be
on that a
happy
little
to.
bit.
You're right. The price of college has far outpaced inflation. We all know that. That's been the major headlines for the last forever, 20, 30 years. I don't see that slowing down anytime soon.
Hmm.
Just so parents out there are prepared for that. I think I start a lot of my talks with saying, if you're coming to our talk tonight to hear me say, here's where you can get college for super cheap, then you're not going to probably get a lot of answers that you're hoping to get tonight. So, college is expensive, and I think families need to be prepared with that long before senior year. I think it's important that parents have honest conversations with their children about what they can't afford for college. You are the parent, and I think this is a place to say this is what our family can afford. But I also think that families need to be realistically prepared to understand what college does cost. And waiting until senior year, for example, to understand that is probably too late. There's still time, at some points in senior year, still to maybe, redirect the process if we need to. But being informed about financial aid is something that should happen before a college list is built. And it starts really with a parent
Right.
understanding and having conversations with what is the affordability zone for my house. That's what I call it when I meet with my families. Is I say, yeah, like I don't need to know your income and your assets because I'm not in a college financial aid office. I'm sitting and talking to you here at our high school. But what I do need to know is what your affordability zone is. So parents, you need to be prepared that colleges are going to look at this in terms of you being able to pay for college as the primary contributor to paying for college. Colleges see it as that is the role of the parent. Um, Parents obviously are looking at it with like, what is the college going to help me with? But parents need to be prepared with understanding that the most of the time paying for college is not going to be just what we can comfortably write a check for. It's going to be a little bit of a stretch beyond that. What are you going to
Mhm.
be uncomfortable writing a check for? And then what are you going to even beyond that going to be really uncomfortable, perhaps borrowing? And that has to enter into the college conversation at some level, just because
Mhm.
almost all colleges, with the exception of a very few, very small handful of colleges that have that don't package student loans in their financial aid packages up front, um, almost all colleges expect that a student will borrow to help pay for college because it's really the only way that the student can have investment in their own future. But as we look at the national landscape, I think it's really important for parents to understand a couple of really basic foundational principles from the start. And the first one is understanding what kind of money you're even dealing with. Every dollar of financial aid falls into one of two categories. It's either need-based or it's merit-based. Some colleges only have one kind of financial aid, or some colleges really specialize in one of those two categories. But for example, let's talk about your very highly selective, internationally known colleges like Stanford and Harvard, Princeton, et cetera. Those colleges have a lot of money to put into their financial aid coffers and award really robust financial aid, but it's all in the need-based category. There's Those colleges don't have any merit scholarships, for example. And so a family who thinks like, oh, my smart kid can get into a college like that and they're just going to have to get a merit scholarship to help pay for college, well, then you need to retool your list because those colleges are only looking at your family based on a need-based assessment, which I can explain in a few minutes. Then you've got merit financial aid on the other side of that, which is, all based on some criteria that the student has that the college desires to have on their campus. And so it's not always a straightforward, meritocracy to use the merit word in there. There are many colleges that do award greater amounts of financial aid based on a certain tiered definition that they might have of grades, perhaps test scores. The higher those go, then possibly the more
Mhm.
aid you might get. But it's not always that straightforward either. And so that's what lends to the mystery of this whole process is families are confused from the get-go of even understanding the difference between, are we talking about need-based aid or are we talking about merit aid? Am I going to qualify based on my income and assets for need-based aid? Is my kid going to qualify for any merit aid based on what that college wants? And so that makes it for a very confusing milieu of, just trying to understand the landscape from the beginning. So what I like to do is try to educate families on, there are ways that you can kind of reasonably predict with some degree of certainty what you can expect. So just starting with understanding that there's need-based and merit-based aid and there's differences between those two is important. The second layer is understanding where the money's coming from. So that's the other thing that families are always like, where can I find the money? Where can I find the money? The largest source by far of money that's available to help pay for college comes from the federal and the state governments. The next largest source comes from the college itself, and so that's why I'm really passionate about students building their lists intelligently. If a family needs to be within a certain affordability zone, then you can kind of guess where some colleges are going to fall with that, with what kind of aid they're going to award to you. um, Often based paired with the help of a college counselor or an independent consultant or a high school counselor that can help them. It's useful for families to solicit the services of somebody that can help them navigate that, because otherwise it is a pretty heavy lift to understand that to get totally self-educated on that. But hopefully that's part of what I can bring some of the understanding to this process here today, is understanding a little bit about where is the money coming from? What is my family going to qualify for? And so three sources of aid. I said that the federal and state government is the first one, second one's the college, third one is everything else. And the everything else category is what we call in the financial aid
Mhm.
community outside scholarships. And that is, or
Mhm.
private scholarships. Those are the ones that families really tend to concentrate on. And I know you've had a couple of guests on your podcast that have talked about, like here's some great search engines and apps for, you absolutely should spend the time applying for outside scholarships. And I appreciate that perspective a lot, but I'm actually going to give a little bit of a contrary viewpoint to that. And that is that in the financial aid world where I sit at a college, we would honestly say that most of the time it's not probably worth your effort to spend a ton of time applying to those kinds of things.
Right, like the Coca-Cola
I'd say that
scholarship,
again.
like these things that have a ton of visibility are also
Very
very
competitive. Like
competitive.
you really have to be like a top student in the country to, to be able to win some of those scholarships. If you just look at the profile of winners, of which I've actually had one at my high school, their resumes are very, very long and very, very achievement focused. And so a lot of teenagers, that's just not
Hmm.
how we live, and a lot of parents don't want
Hmm.
that lifestyle for their kids as teenagers. So what do you do with, your average normal high achieving student who does have good grades and test scores and has been involved in a lot of like really good activities where perhaps they've made an impact? Um, that's almost everybody going to college. And so that's what makes it a little hard to differentiate when you're talking about looking for those outside scholarships. There are ones that it does make sense to apply to, and those are typically the types of scholarships that, first of all, already have a reduced pool of applicants, like maybe a local scholarship that's available to kids in your area, kids from, your city, kids perhaps even from your high school. I've heard of that where there's maybe like one little, women's association in a town that like really wants the kids from, that high school to apply, and they're going to award them a few, 500 or $1,000 scholarships. Yes, kids can spend time applying for those and maybe win some of those outside scholarships, but here's the problem. The problem is they're one-time sources of money, and they almost never go very far for paying that college bill. And so I say, yes, apply for the ones that make sense, where there's already a reduced pool of applicants or where the scholarship actually fits exactly who you are. So, I use the example, it's a little facetious, obviously, of, if there's a scholarship for a left-handed violin player and you are one, you should apply for it. Like if it's that niche.
Right.
Yeah. So besides that, it's just sometimes it makes more sense for a student to just work and earn money and put it towards a college account because you're going to spend about the same amount of hours working a part-time job as a teenager as you would spending applying for a lot of these outside scholarships. And so I ask parents to consider, I know we want our kids to apply for these outside scholarships, but that's not where the bulk of the money is. It's just not. And yeah, your kid might win 1 to 4 or 5 thousand dollars of scholarships, but it's one time. It's only going to help pay the bill freshman year. And after that, yes, there are other scholarships you can apply to
Right.
once you're in college, but again, the real wisdom comes in building that college list appropriately from the beginning so that you're at a place where the price of the college is already in that family's affordability zone.
Well, right. And I mean, I think part of the problem that people have with that is it's not 100% transparent what the price of that college
For
actually
sure.
is because, like you said, most of these colleges are giving significant financial aid. Even like the public institutions now are very expensive. They're just giving financial aid to some like over 50% of the people. So how can you get a good sense for that ahead of
Yeah.
time? Like how can you, okay, my kid wants to go to Ohio State, but like, is it going to be full freight Ohio State or is it going to be like discounted Ohio
Right,
State?
right. So that's a great question. Let me break things down into some more categories for you. So these are generalities. Hopefully they will give families a really good foundation out of which to operate. And within these categories, obviously there's going to be exceptions to what I'm saying, but by and large, you can think of college in three large swaths, types of colleges, and the type of college is going to determine the type of money that they offer or that is available to a student. Okay.
Mhm.
In the first category, we're going to talk about your public institutions, your large public institutions. So most states have a public university, all states have a public university system. And most states have that divided into three tiers of public university systems. So you have your community college level, you'll have your state level university. So like I live in California, so we call that the Cal State system. We're a very large state, obviously, and so there's 23 Cal States in California, and other states there might be, five or six. I think in New York there's like 70 of the New York state level colleges. And then you'll have your flagship colleges. So the University ofs, University of Arkansas, University of California, University of Texas. That's different from your state level institutions. And they have different chartered purposes by those states. And so they have different price point entry levels. Obviously, community college is your least expensive. Your state level is moderately. priced, and then your university of is usually your most expensive. So a nice fun statistic is that nationally 80% of college students in our country go to colleges that cost less than $10,000 per year. Well, where are the colleges that cost less than $10,000 per year? Those are your state institutions that you can commute to. Because once you add on, and I say commuting, I want to draw that distinction for families, is because once you add on the expectation or the hope or the desire of a 4-year on-campus residential experience, you are raising that price by $15,000 to $20,000. So even at our Cal State system, our tuition is less than $10,000. And so if you commute to college, you're paying either at a community college or at a state level, you're usually paying less than $10,000 for your in-state institutions per year. But when you move on campus, now your cost is going to usually be between $20,000 and $30,000 a year, depending on your state and how much it costs to live there. In California, our Cal State system price tag is about $30,000 a year. And so it's really difficult to get it. That's the sticker price at your state institutions. And unless you qualify for federal or state aid, that is the price you're going to pay. So I'll talk about federal state aid in a second. And if you go to a public institution in another state, then you can expect for most states, you're going to pay an out of state premium. So, for example, very popular flagship university of, tier 1 R1 research universities, let's take University of Virginia, University of Michigan, University of Washington, University of California system for an out of state student is going to start at like $65,000 a year, and there's no aid for out of state students, merit aid from that college or discounts from that college. Okay, they're popular. They don't need to offer aid to out of state students. So if you want to go to a flagship university in another state, then you need to just be prepared to pay that price. There are exceptions to that. There are states that have consortium together to offer discounts to neighboring states. For example, there's some in the Northeast, there's some in the Midwest, and there's some out here in the West. But you have to do your homework on that and understand which colleges offer that, because it's not necessarily a blanket policy. Okay. So with your state institutions, you have your different price points, and your university ofs. I've talked about the state level. The university ofs are the most expensive in that three-tiered system. And like, for example, in California, you want that 4-year residential experience at University of California at Berkeley or Los Angeles or Irvine, at San Diego, etc. That's going to cost a family in state about $40,000 a year. So how can that price of those public institutions be brought down? It's almost always purely by whether or not you qualify for federal or state aid. So sources of aid, government. Remember I said the government aid is the largest source. Do you qualify for the federal programs? The Pell Grant being the main one. That's typically reserved for families that make under $50,000 or $60,000 a year. There's no hard cutoff for that because there's many factors that go into assessing Pell Grant eligibility. Okay, but so it's going to vary from family to family, but that's generally the zone. Your state probably has state aid, okay, here in California, which, by the way, California public systems educate 10% of America's college students. So in our state system, we have a couple of state aid programs that are really popular, and if you qualify for them based on an income and a GPA cutoff, there are hard cutoffs for some of those for state aid, then it pays for your tuition at a public institution. And so the University of California, for example, has right on their website 54% of students who come to a UC aren't paying any tuition at all. And that's because 54% of the students are qualifying for our state aid or our federal aid that are bringing that cost down. But if you don't qualify for those federal or state aid programs based on their income cutoffs, then you're going to be paying full price for that state system. Okay, so that's how you can evaluate your own state system, is understanding, like, where do I qualify? What are the price points for getting in? And that is usually easily understood. It's usually pretty black and white. Second category of college, on the other extreme from the public institution, are your internationally known, highly selective, highly popular colleges. Okay, there's a term coined in our profession there. We call them highly rejective colleges because they're rejecting most students who apply. They're really popular because of US News and World Report rankings, and so they may have 2,000 seats, but they might have 60,000 applicants, and so they're already gonna, they're gonna be they're going to have to
Right.
deny most of the students who apply. And they get to pick the best students that they want to have come to those institutions. So we're talking about there's really, fewer than 140 colleges that fall into that category of being highly selective out of the, depending on how you categorize colleges, 2,500 at a minimum to 4,000 colleges in this country. There's really only about 140, 150 of them that are highly selective. And so those institutions,
Yeah.
they have really strong financial aid policies, but they don't, most of them, many of them, award very few, if any, merit scholarships, almost zero. Again, your Ivy League institutions and your like-minded Ivies like MIT, Caltech, Stanford, they have no merit scholarships. Okay, so that's where you have to know, like, do I qualify for need-based aid at those colleges? And you can know if you qualify for need-based aid. Every
Mhm.
college is required by federal law to have something called a net price calculator on their website. So if you just Google name of college, net price
Right.
calculator, you'll get right to it. And it might take 5, 10, 15 minutes to run that net price calculator, and it'll give you a pretty reasonable number of what you can be expected to pay at that college per year. So those are your two extremes of, your state institutions and your highly selective institutions and what types of policies they have.
Hmm.
Then you've got your third category, and that's everything else.
All right.
The third
Yeah. What's the
category
third
is
category?
everything else. And so, just for sake of our conversation here, I'm going to call those regional private colleges. Okay, so those are, for example, all of your Catholic colleges, all of your Protestant colleges, your evangelical Christian colleges, your colleges of other religions, your secular, small, private liberal arts colleges. So that's the everything else that's going to fall into that kind of a category. Again, not public institutions, not elite, highly selective institutions. Everything else, there's over 2,000 colleges in that everything else category. And that's where the waters get murky
Hmm.
because most of those colleges don't have the old and rich endowments to be able to like fully fund a need-based financial aid program. Not very many of those are even coming close to meeting a family's financial need. And when I say, let me pause right there, let me just say, let me explain need, what I even mean by that. Need means that's a financial aid office term that we use to say once your family's filled out the FAFSA and possibly the CSS profile, the two main forms in the process. And those are just data collection forms. Those are not places that award money. You're not getting money from FAFSA. You're not getting money from CSS
Hmm.
profile. The money's coming from the college or the government. They collect the data, the FAFSA and the CSS profile, send the data to the colleges, and then the colleges, in conjunction with the state and federal programs, are the ones that are going to award you that money. Okay, but anyway, that's all run through
Right.
a formula. There's the federal formula, which is the same across the country, and then there's the institutional formula, which can vary from college to college, and that's what makes it confusing, is because every college has control over their own institutional money, and they use their own formula. It's called institutional methodology to award their own money. And that's where their own institutional priorities are going to come into play in terms of how much money they're awarding and to whom. And that's where all the confusion comes in, is because you can get wildly different financial aid offers from colleges because they're choosing how to award their own money based on their own priorities of who they want to enroll at their college. So within that large category of, not public, not highly rejected colleges, but the everything else category, that's where it gets confusing in terms of, do I qualify for any need-based aid? Even if I do, these colleges are in the category where they don't have the old rich endowments to be able to meet 100% of your need. So they're going to attract the students that they want the most with that merit money. Okay, and they're going to do what's called tuition discount
Hmm.
pricing to offer you a little bit off. So that's where it comes in what you said. Basically, most people aren't paying sticker price at these colleges. This is the largest category. So you might see, for example, a sticker price at a certain college that might be $65,000 a year or $85,000 a year, but nobody's paying that. And they even say that right on their website. They'll say 100% of our students get a scholarship. That's because they're discounting the price for everybody. But what is the price going to be for your family is going to totally depend on characteristics about your student and the desirability of your student at that college. And so that's where those tiered scholarships come in. That some colleges will say, well, we want really strong students with high test scores and high grades, and we're going to give more money for that. And so that discount, remember tuition discount off of that, let's start with just an $80,000 sticker price in our example. If you have great grades and test scores, you might automatically get $20,000 off of that price. So that's bringing the cost of that college down to 60. But if you have
Mhm.
really super duper grades and test scores, and you've got some national level or international accomplishments under your belt as a student, as a high school student, then that might bring the cost down another $15,000 to $20,000. And so now you might only pay $40,000 for a certain college in certain categories. So that's a little bit about how that
Mhm.
works. And then if a student does qualify for perhaps state grant on top of that, or maybe they're going to go to college that has stackable merit scholarships where they might give you a little bit more. Say if you're going to play piano and accompany the choir, you might get another $1,500. Or maybe you're gonna do the stats for the basketball team, we'll give you another $1,000. You know, you might debate for the debate team, here's another 1,000 or $2. So those are the kinds of scholarships that a college could stack. They don't always publicize those, and so that's part of what makes it such a big mystery in terms of families not knowing what am I even going to get from these colleges.
Well, right. And I mean, it's because it depends so much on like number one, are they having a good or a bad
Yeah.
enrollment year? Right. Number two, they're basically like just giving you free money. So they don't want to tell you how much ahead of time
Yes.
that's going to be. I mean, and then they want to give you as little as they can
Exactly.
while still having to go, right? Like, I mean, it's all these things factor into it. So I'm curious, like, how do you navigate all of this, right? Like, I mean, I think that if imagine, you're talking to parents that are kind of just starting the college process at the beginning of the year 2026, right? Like, I I think that, what I would say my starting point would be is I would first, figure out what are all the colleges that my child knows about and is thinking about at all, put them in a list and start to spec out like, what are the median SAT, ACT scores for all of them, like, and then what is like their sort of expected cost for us with that calculator. And so let's say you've done that, right? Like those are like the first couple of steps. Then the second question is, like you said, it becomes a lot more nebulous. It's like, okay, what are the types of scholarships that we could potentially qualify for, right? I think the biggest difference there is going to be in-state versus out-of-state. But then, like within the school itself, in this fuzzy category, like how can you get a sense for how much of a discount you're going to be able to get?
It can be difficult. And because, like I said, colleges don't always publish what that discount can be. But what we do know is that nationwide, the average discount is 56% off of the sticker price, and that is rising. And yeah, so that's
Wow.
where, I would encourage families like just because you might see an $80,000 a year price tag, don't immediately take that college off your child's list. Now, again, if you're looking for a college that's going to be $10 or $15,000 a year, then you need to look at your public institutions, or you need to look at, perhaps if you would qualify for need-based aid at a very elite private institution, that would bring that cost down to that much because they're going to meet 100% of your need, then those are your two categories where you can know with a good deal of predictability, like what's going to be available to me. But yeah, it is this middle category that's hard to know. Like even though the national average of of price discounting is 56%, let's just take, I'm not trying to pick on any certain college, but let's just take like a Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles, a Jesuit college. They have a published sticker price that's close to around $80,000, give or take. And they'll publish on their website. You go to, to answer your question in the short way, the short answer is it takes some work. You have to do the research. You have to go look at the website of that college. You have to see what is the price of this college. You have to read on their scholarship pages. What are the scholarships? Who are they available to? How much are they? And so some colleges put those tiered numbers right on their website. I like to use the example just because I'm here in San Diego. Point Loma Nazarene University here in San Diego publishes right on their website those tiered scholarships, GPA test scores, top to bottom. Here's what you can expect to get off of that sticker price. But a lot of colleges aren't that transparent in terms of publishing it. But that's also not the final word. Again, is you can read that and then know, like, oh, I know where my GPA and test scores fall. So I know that I can get this much off, but is there more? And the answer to that is yes, maybe. And so you have to wait till you're admitted and you see if they award you any money. And then sometimes there can be room for some negotiation with that. And I know that's hard then to plan and predict before the senior year, but that's where, I said wait at the beginning of our conversation, back it up to junior year. I think the first step is first of all, in defining what is my family's affordability zone. If I'm in the upper middle
Mhm.
class tier, which there's been several articles published on, that's the group that's actually being hurt by current college pricing policies, is because you're not, let's take 2-degree parents with professional level jobs where maybe a household income is above $200,000 a year. You're in a zone where you're not necessarily qualifying for much need-based aid, if any, and yet you can't afford to write a check for a college that costs 60 to $100,000 a year. You just can't, especially if you live in California, So if you're not going to qualify for need-based aid and your child's aiming for, the Stanfords of the world, then you have to be prepared to pay full sticker price. And so a family can decide right from the get-go, we know we're not qualifying for need-based aid. Stanford doesn't have any merit scholarships, and we cannot pay $100,000 a year. So Stanford's not on the list, etc. Fill in the blank with colleges that are in that tier, like your Loyola Marymount's or your other Jesuit colleges that are, not quite at that price, but maybe they're 80,000-ish, give or take. They are not going to meet full financial need, and maybe that family I'm using the example isn't going to qualify for need-based aid anyway, or very little of it. What can you get in merit scholarships? There's websites you can look up that tell you the average discount aid of those colleges, I'm sorry, and you have to read those websites of the college themselves. So that's where it takes a little bit of work, finding out like what do they offer in merit aid. Is my child going to even qualify for any of those merit scholarships? And sometimes the maximum scholarship at a college still isn't going to bring the price into the affordability level. So the strategy I tell families is, even though I know many, many families only want to look at colleges with very low acceptance rates, you also have to have a discussion in your home about how you value college. Is a college that has a higher admit rate that admits most of the students, is that good for your family? Is that good for your child? Do they have the kind of things they want to study? And so, evaluating that, so those 2,000, 2,500 colleges that fall into that regional private college category are the ones that are giving the most discounts. And that's where your child could find college for
Mhm.
less than, $50,000 a year. You could get it down to 40, you could get it down to 30. It's going to be really hard to get private college for much less than $30,000 though. Again, these are generalities. There's exceptions to this.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting, you're talking about like Loyola Marymount or other colleges. Yes, the average discount is 50%, but I think that so much of that is probably schools that you wouldn't necessarily be putting at the top of your list
Right.
offering very large discounts. And I also think that, let's say you've got a particular school you really want to go to. Let's say it's Loyola Marymount. You can't afford 80K. You could maybe swing, I don't know, 50 or something. Well, you need to look at where you compare to all of the other
Yes,
applicants. Because if you're in the bottom quartile of applicants and you could get in, but like it would be a little bit close, they're not going to be as compelled to give you a
I
ton of
would agree with
financial
that.
aid to go there versus if you're in the top quartile of applicants, right? I don't know if you make a guess on how much of a discount you could potentially get, or you could use the tiers that they have and the criteria that they have. I think that you should make a conservative guess, and that conservative guess should be based on how you compare to the metrics that you have
Yes.
for that college, right? Like how you compare to their average SAT, ACT scores, how you compare to the GPAs
Yes,
and
that's
other
a really
things.
good place to start too, and to take that into consideration. I think there's multiple, if we look at the college cost as the center target, I think there's multiple angles from which to poke this target from, right? Is like you poke it first from what is my family's affordability zone? You poke it again from is my child even admissible? And then getting, deeper into that consideration. And again, I'm assuming that a family has also already looked at does this college even have the things that my child might want to study, even if they're undecided? Is it a good place to explore? Or do they have, if my child knows what they want to study, do they have the major I want? So, yeah, of course, that's the first filter. Is my child ready to go far from home? That's another layer, so location it often comes into play. How far away should they go from home? Again, within another 80% number of college students in America go to college within 3 hours of their home. So, it's the minority of students who are traveling across the country and who are going to colleges that cost more than $10,000 a year. So that's just the reality of the national landscape. But yeah, thinking about then where your child falls into that target of that college, another good piece of data. And so there's some really great resources to do that. Yeah, obviously you can search on the internet. I think you just need to be careful though, because you can often put into a search engine any question for colleges that have fill in the blank, and most of them are going to start with Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, Columbia on their lists, and that's where it gets really frustrating. Is I would be a little really specific with targeted searches, like colleges that are hidden gems, you know, great colleges for B students. Let's make our searches really specific, but a couple of really great resources in terms of understanding some of that data are books like the Princeton Review Guide. This one, that's the Princeton Review Guide is the best 391 colleges. That's the 2026 edition. It changes a little bit every year. This has really good data where you can
Mhm.
you can you turn a page and it's a different college on each page, and then there's really it's the same format, and it tells you the average scores. It tells you about financial aid and what their policies are in a really condensed version. So a book, an old school book is actually not a bad idea to get. Another resource that I love for families who really want to put in the work is this book called The College Finder by Stephen Antonov, and he's a rock star in our field and
Mhm.
has published. This is a book of lists. So again, you can come up with kind of any category you want, and this has been vetted by a lot of college professionals over the years that contribute to this book. And so it's one of those that, if you're trying to hone in on, a specific category of college or a specific major or specific attribute of a college, large colleges in small towns, small colleges in large towns, etc., on and on and on. And this is a very thick book. Then this is another great place to start that gives you the information, I think, a little more accessible than just searching the wild internet. And so there's even sections in this book that help you to understand college affordability. And so this might be a great resource for some families to be able to understand that and to have a kind of a starting point for building that list intelligently.
The gist of what you're getting at is like the internet is full of a lot of clickbait articles that are, they focus on Harvard, Stanford, etc., because that's where
Yes.
all the traffic is. And they also, are not always like super well researched, not to the level of those books. And I think also those books can help you start to understand it's like, okay, like even if this book is not accurate 100% of the time, it's all coming from the same source, right? If you read five different blog posts about the most affordable colleges in Virginia, you're going to maybe see some overlap, but you will also see some random ones, and you're not sure how accurate each individual article
Correct.
is, right? Like these are like sources of truth that you can rely on to, give an even playing field for everyone involved. And then, I like that field guide one a lot because essentially, what building a college list is probably going to the best way to build a college list, I think, is always about like trying to be as niche and specific as possible about what you want to do if you do that, right? Because your top 10 biology colleges are going to be very different than Harvard, Stanford, Yale necessarily. And then you can find some
Yeah.
really good
I also
value
think
there.
there's a lot of wisdom in not just looking, like, say a child does know what they want to study. Okay, so first of all, the minimum statistic I've heard on kids changing their major is 70% of students change their major. The maximum statistic I've heard is 90%. So it's somewhere between 70 and 90% of kids change their major once they get to the college. So you have to back up
Oh,
first of
wow.
all and say, maybe we shouldn't only search for colleges by major. Okay, maybe we shouldn't only look for top 10 colleges in biology. Every college has a biology program. It's one of the most
Mm.
popular majors in the country. I've toured over 140 colleges, and every single one of them that I've been on either has built, is building, or will build in the next 2 years a brand new biological sciences building because it's that popular everywhere. So you're going to be able to throw a rock and hit a college and study biology and probably have a really great experience. You know, organic or organismal biology is going to be the same at Point Loma Nazarene versus Stanford. And that's been attested to over and over and over again by professors who've taught at both of those kinds of colleges. And so, you know, then you have to layer in like what is a good fit for my student? I know we're kind of going beyond the scope of financial aid, but it all relates to financial aid. Is sometimes it's good to be that big fish in a small pond because you're going to have more opportunities and that's where it's going to be more affordable in that big giant category of all the other colleges that aren't public institutions and aren't your Stanfords of the world. You've got a huge swath within that of colleges that are selective all the way to, you know, that have below a 50% admit rate to colleges that are admitting most of their students. And the higher you go in that admit rate, the more money and the more tuition discounting you're likely to get from that college. So a college that has a 40% admit rate doesn't need to discount their tuition as much as a college that has an 80% admit rate. What is your child's experience going to be on those two campuses? Is it going to be substantially different? Probably not in terms of what is going to happen in that classroom. The difference is going to come in, you know, are they going to have access to research opportunities, to long-term projects, to professors that are going to mentor them? Those are the things that have been found over and over and over again to make the difference 20, 30, 40 years after college is what kinds of opportunities did you have access to at your college? And so to seek those out at those smaller colleges that are heavily discounting their tuition, that's the hidden gem. That's the sweet spot to look for in terms of aligning that. Now, again, that's not still going to be super cheap. It's not going to likely, you're not going to find a college in that category that's going to come below, again, generalities, everybody, much below about $30,000 a year. So if that's already outside of a family's affordability zone, if that's a no can do, then your college list is very short. You're right at just going looking at your public colleges in your backyard. And that makes the process really easy and straightforward, and you don't have to do all this ton of research. But if you have the flexibility, and I ask my families at my schooling, tell me kind of where you land in a $10,000 swath. You know, do you need college to cost 30,000? Can you pay 40,000? Can you pay 50,000? Can you pay 60,000? Because every time we add another $10,000, that's going to open up a different layer of college, and it's almost always associated, or there's a high correlation anyway, between the admit rate and the cost of that college.
Yeah, and I think that that is the right way to approach it. And hopefully, these other families have a good counselor like you to kind of guide them through this process. But if they don't, or if they're just trying to figure this out on their own, what other advice do you have for them basically to go through this?
I think in terms of trying to understand the landscape, it can either be the job of highly driven students, highly motivated parents, and if there's just not time or enough drive in your family to handle that, then yeah, you do need to seek the advice of either a high school counselor. You know, if you're at a small private school, then your high school counselor is going to be really well informed. Unfortunately, if you're at a large public school, those counselors don't have as much time to dedicate to the college search process. That's probably less than 10% of their job.
Yeah, I think it's like an
Yeah.
average of like 500 students to one
Yes.
counselor in public
Yes.
schools or something.
No,
There's not enough
and
time.
they're just as informed on most of these things as a counselor like me at a small private school, but they just don't have the time to really counsel students in a heavy duty way
Hmm.
through that college application process. And so a lot of families at large public schools will end up hiring an independent consultant. And so those can be very expensive, but a lot of families feel like that's worth the investment of their money just because they know that their counselor at their high school isn't able to help them guide them in a very specific way through that process. And so when you're looking for an independent consultant, you really should look for somebody that's part of a professional organization. The Independent Counselors Association, the IECA, is a really good place to start. If a college counselor has that credential or perhaps has gone through the college counseling certificate programs at the UCs, they have those. So that college counselors can get, those are people who've kind of at least gone through some really basic education, and in some cases even a more higher level certification of being knowledgeable in the field. And there is a lot of agreement among us as professionals. We're all going to give pretty consistent, sane advice when it comes to this. Obviously, there's bad actors in every field, but for the most part, those of us who care and really want to do our jobs well, we're giving you kind of the same advice that I'm giving you here today.
Great. Yeah, and then I think, I mean, I've really enjoyed this episode. I think we've got a lot of really good information here and like strategy and kind of a thoughtful approach. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure we covered, or is there anything you want to say as we wrap up?
I can't think of anything, Tyler. I mean, I could talk about financial aid a long time. I love kind of nerding out on it, and there's probably more questions that we haven't explored, but I think families have gotten a pretty comprehensive, um, more than overview from our conversation today.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Becky Priest from the Cambridge School. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT and CLT courses by going to achievable.me.